Theosophical Society, Point Loma. And we will now hear Wesley Amerman, who is from the ULT in Los Angeles. And I have known him since I was about this tall, and he was about this tall, okay? This is how long we go back. And, yeah. And so Wesley has been a lifelong student, needless to say, of Theosophy. He has had his shoulder to the wheel, so to speak, for many years and decades as a very dedicated and very profound student of Theosophy. But today he is here to tell us about HPB and social responsibility. Wesley?
Well, now we get the technical parts of Theosophy figured out. We can get started. Good morning, and thank you for the more than kind and very generous introduction, Jonathan. A friend of ours wrote an article a few years ago. I'm not sure if Will Thacker is here today, on the perennial tradition. And in it, he cites Plato's dialogue, The Banquet, where Plato says that love is that place between the human and the gods. It's reachable for us through philosophy. Theosophy, love of wisdom, or the knowledge of the gods, is approached through philosophia, a love of that wisdom. For us, we would say, well, compassion is that link between human beings and true knowledge. HPB indicates quite clearly in her article, What is Truth? That all we have to work with in our lives, in the world, is relative truths. Everything we say here, everything we read in the philosophy, everything we discuss is maybe true, but it's still only relatively true. An issue like social responsibility is one of those kinds of topics. I think everyone has probably read by now her wonderful article, Let Every Man Prove His Own Work. It's one of those seminal sets of ideas, wonderfully stated, showing how just doing good isn't enough. There's lots of doing good in the world, and she says Theosophists have an especially difficult task because we should recognize that doing good requires knowing what the heck we're doing. And so often, so much is done in the name of doing good that just plain hurts. And if we learn anything from Theosophy, we learn anything from Blavatsky, it's to take the ethical counterpart of the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm, and do no harm to others. And so how do we get from where we are, clearly relatively ignorant, to wisdom? Well, philosophy is really that link. It gets us part way. It's not sufficient, it's not complete in and of itself, but it's absolutely necessary. But Herman said it quite well. Without the ideal of compassion, all the technical stuff about Theosophy is just worse than useless, because it confuses us, it can blind us, it can inure us and isolate us from the real need. There are three places in Blavatsky's writings that are really seminal on this idea of compassion and directly or indirectly on the issue of social responsibility. The first we've mentioned, we've all read her article, Let Every Man Prove His Own Work. The second is the voice of the silence. Whatever else we read in Theosophy, the voice tells us that the path of wisdom is through the path of service. There is no other way. The third, we might say, key element are her messages to the American Theosophists. Between 1888 and 1891, she wrote basically letters of, well, congratulations, but of real fact and real substance to the American Theosophists at their convention here in the United States. She didn't come herself, others read her letters. And in one of those letters, she said that what's needed is this ideal of compassion and of service. That ethics are the most important thing in Theosophy. Far more important than any particular doctrine, any particular divulgement, she says, of psychic laws and facts. All of that's useful, but it's useless without that ideal of compassion put into practice. Now, before coming here, it occurred to us that there's kind of a dilemma, and she talks about it in her article, Let Every Man Prove His Own Work. The dilemma is the dilemma of service. How to help and when not to really is the problem for all of us, for all human beings. And she indicates in her article, in that article we mentioned, the limits of social philanthropy, the limits of religious philanthropy, the limits of asking ourselves the question, what is it we ought to be doing? And there's a bit of that, as I was thinking about this subject before coming here, there's a little bit of that in our topic. The fact that we posit the question of moral responsibility and moral service and moral philanthropy means that we are in that place that Plato indicates in the Banquet, partway between being human and being wise. We're only partway there. And so the sense that we had was that, well, we're going to come together and deal with this issue of, golly, what ought we to be doing? Should there be a broader program of theosophical service? Should we implement some sweeping social program? Should we start soup kitchens? Should we create homeless shelters? What do we do? Are we missing something? Was the question. But the fact that we're getting together and asking these kinds of questions would seem to indicate that we haven't missed anything. We just haven't completed the task. So what is it we need to do? I think our first speaker, Herman, said very well. We need to begin with this ideal of universal brotherhood, of ethical service, and then figure out what it means. What was HPB's vision in the voice, in her articles, in her letters to the American Theosophists? What is it she's saying about the value of better ideas? Because that's essentially where she's coming from, we think. Or at least it's one way to look at how HPB views social responsibility. Plato said it. Ideas rule the world. The ideas and ideals that human beings really hold, as opposed to those that they say they hold, are far more important than the details of the doctrines that they expound. Now, that doesn't mean the doctrines aren't important. In another of her articles, Civilization, the Death of Art and Beauty, should tell us enough about what she thought of Western civilization, of Western philanthropy, of our materialistic religious view of the world. Those kinds of ideas that she said were becoming more popular in the world that were simply based in our Western selfishness, and not just in Western selfishness, in human nature, precluded the appreciation of students, people around the world, of other cultures, of other viewpoints. Now, coming together in a place like this with the kind of history that it has tells us there's been some progress made. We should commend all groups that do things like this, that now welcome others. You know, remember in the article, Let Every Man Prove His Own Work, she says, Theosophists would never turn away others that weren't Theosophists from a theosophical hospital, as other religious groups have done. Well, that doesn't happen anymore, at least not openly, and probably not in this country or in Europe. But it's a human nature issue. So Blavatsky's whole point is that what is needed is a whole different kind of vision of what human beings are. What is it are we really? And that's that journey of discovery that can take us through the theosophical philosophy, that can take us through a path of self-learning, that can take us to places where we can share that kind of vision with others without overwhelming them with the metaphysics of the secret doctrine, although all of that is important. It takes a balance, don't you think? It takes a balance between the compassion, the right ideas, and a willingness, and in one place she says, only a little sincere attempt to share those ideas with a people and a world that are in desperate need of them. The world really does need what Theosophy has to offer. It doesn't need it to be in the form that we think it does, but those ideas and ideals are absolutely essential. What are they? We touched on them just a few minutes ago in the first talk. Karma, reincarnation, human solidarity, spiritual evolution. It can be a relatively short list. But behind it all is the assumption that we find in the fundamental propositions. The third fundamental talks about the journey of the soul. And that journey of the soul is something that can be followed, is followed, actively or not, with knowledge or not, by every single human being. That's the path of life. And if we look at it as, and can share it as, the path of the soul, then that transforms. It has the potential to transform how the world looks at itself. With those kinds of ideas, she says in the article we mentioned, Civilization, the Death of Art and Beauty, she gives examples of cultures where reincarnation and karma, practically understood, simply known, have profound, just absolutely profound implications. Some 20 years after her death, Lafcadio Hearn wrote a work about Burma, The Soul of a People. It's not Lafcadio Hearn, excuse me, it's Fielding Hall. And about Burma, how the idea of reincarnation and karma played out practically in people's lives. There was almost no crime in Burma before the British got there. A couple of generations later, crime was rampant. Why? The ideas were forced, and now you had the idea that it was okay to do something, and you could expunge it automatically. The idea of a personal God, the idea of vicarious atonement, those things came in and changed Burma. Burma's still changed today. By contrast, As she said, Buddha made all Asia mild. Why? A different vision about human beings as to who and what we are. That really is what it comes down to. What are human beings, and what ideas do we put into practice? If we're going to implement some kind of ethical transformation, because that's really what we're talking about, an ethical transformation of the very fabric of our civilization. If we're going to do that, we have to start with some simple ideas, clearly explained, and gently educated. So that's really all I have to say at this point. I'm sure there's more, but we'll continue. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Wes. And now we will hear from a husband and wife team.